Pues, bienvenidos a la Finca El Chaferote de la familia Bravo Urbano.
We're deep in the south of Colombia,
Estamos en San Agustín, Huila, Vereda La Chiquita, Colombia.
in the mountainous region of Huila.
Mi nombre es Erick Bravo.
And we're on the specialty coffee farm of Erick Bravo, Finca El Chaferote. And Erick Bravo's farm produces just beautiful specialty coffees.
Pero gracias a Dios, después de que entramos en el mundo de cafés de especialidad,
Coffee's so good, they win awards. For example, in 2019, his farm came third in the Colombian Cup of Excellence.
Tax a la Excelencia, que fue en el año 2019, mi papá ocupó el tercer puesto.
And the coffee roaster George Howell, he bought some of that award-winning coffee, and he mentioned Erick's coffees had notes of guava, brown sugar, and pineapple.
Y vamos a mirar cafetales.
And like we saw in the last episode, the reasons his flavors are so good is because he puts a tremendous amount of time and energy producing them.
A la parte de arriba también, como podemos observar, también tenemos Borbón Rosado.
To start with, he chooses types of trees, like pink bourbon, that can produce these sorts of wonderful flavors of brown sugar and guava. But to get those flavors, during harvest, he has to very carefully select only the reddest, ripest cherries.
Bueno, después de que se recolectan las cerezas maduras, llegan a la zona de beneficio.
He then floats his cherries in water so he can segment out the juiciest, sweetest ones.
Se sumerge en agua para sacar los flotes,
He ferments his coffees for almost a day and a half.
donde le damos otras 36 horas de fermentación,
And it takes him almost a month to dry his coffees.
de 20 a 25 días en un secado lento.
And then, to make sure that the coffee is really at its absolute best, he manually sorts through all his beans and picks out the bad beans one by one.
Se le hace una selección manual y se pasa por un zarandeo para llevar un buen café al...
It literally takes him and his family days and days and days. And then, finally, his coffees are stored in sacks, sealed up tight, and they're ready to be sold. And in these bags are the magic flavors that we coffee drinkers love. But from here, these flavors are going on an epic journey across the length of Colombia. The journey begins here on the side of a steep mountain slope
More mud.
to the dusty outskirts of a city.
Oh my gosh, so much dust in the air. Look at those plumes of dust coming off the road.
These beans will then travel 700 kilometers north to a noisy and even more dusty dry mill.
Oh my lord, here we go.
And then they're transported another 700 kilometers north, where they get loaded, finally, onto a ship. And along the way, those beautiful flavors of brown sugar, guava, and pineapple can be ruined or even lost. Water from a leaking roof after a rainstorm,
Dripping on coffee bags,
or theft, because this is valuable coffee.
trucks to get stolen or robbed.
Maybe as it makes its way through a dry mill, these aggressive machines smash these beautiful coffee beans to pieces.
Sometimes chip beans or broken beans.
And here's the crazy thing. Every coffee you drink, the beans themselves have been on these sorts of epic journeys. And so, in this episode, we're going to be following the journey that Erick Bravo's coffees take through the supply chain of my partner sponsor for this episode, the Coffee Quest, a specialty coffee exporter and importer based here in Colombia. And we're going to see the tremendous amount of work that it takes to preserve the flavors of this coffee. And we're then going to contrast it to what a commodity-focused supply chain looks like. And my hope is at the end of the episode, you're going to feel like the next coffee you make, you just really take a moment to appreciate, wow, I am never taking you for granted again. I'm James Harper, and this is Filter Stories, the untold stories hidden in your cup of coffee. And you're listening to my third series on the science of coffee, a journey into coffee's hidden microscopic secrets.
En este momento estamos en la casa. Podemos ver que mi hermana y mi hermano trabajan mucho con el jardín. Se ve bonita la casa.
So, on Erick Bravo's farm, El Chaferote, in the family house, sit these sacks of coffee with gorgeous flavors of guava, brown sugar, pineapple. And the first step in their long, long journey is perhaps the most precarious. Because Erick Bravo has to get these coffees from down in the valley, where his farm is, all the way up a mountain to the road, to the truck that's going to collect the coffees and take them down to the city. And it's a unique challenge for him, a challenge that most other coffee farmers don't really have to face, because, like I showed you in the last episode, his farm is really steep.
We've just come to basically the edge of a cliff, literally a cliff. But that's where the coffee trees are, down in the very steep part of the valley.
One misstep, and you're tumbling all the way down into the gushing water and rocks of a fast-flowing river below.
I mean, you could fall down there and you could break some legs.
Anteriormente nos tocaba subir el café en caballos.
Eric tells me he used to have to haul every bag of coffee parchment up this mountain by horse.
This is quite steep. This is a steep little road, little track.
The same trail that we had to follow to get down to his farm.
A very muddy, slippery goat track. Oh, God.
Eric tells me it sometimes took him an entire day just to get the coffees from the farmhouse to the road using a horse. And if it rained during that day, well, that is not good. Because even though the coffees are protected in plastic sacks, you don't want moisture getting anywhere near your coffees. Eric would have carefully dried his coffees for almost a month to a very specific moisture level, and getting moisture in them at this stage could maybe ruin their flavors. Fortunately, these days, Eric doesn't need to use a horse anymore.
All right, what the hell is going on here? I see a cable system. Oh, my God.
Eric's family used the winnings from that Cup of Excellence competition I mentioned earlier to build a pulley system
Como teleférico para carga.
to get coffee from the depths of the farm all the way to the main road. What used to take a whole day can now be done in an hour. Once Eric's coffees are all stacked up by the side of the road, Eric hires a jeep with a driver, straps his coffees in, and they head down to the nearest big city, Pitalito. And those beautiful flavors of his coffee will be treated very differently depending where he sells the coffee. Now, Eric could sell his coffee to two types of buyers, a specialty buyer or a commodity buyer. And we're going to start with the commodity way of selling coffee because this is actually the status quo. It's the way it's been done for the longest time. And it was only until actually quite recently, last 10, 20 years or so, that Eric could have even sold his coffee any other way. It was this commodity system or nothing. So down here in Huila, Pitalito is the place where coffee is bought from all the farms that are racing up the Andes mountain range all around. And although these surroundings are so beautiful, Pitalito itself is busy, rough, industrial city. I had this silly moment where I was trying to find this Airbnb I'd booked, and I was just strolling around with all my audio recording gear that's worth $1,000, and everyone was like, "What are you doing? Hide that, hide it, hide it, hide it." I like to think of myself as a very seasoned traveler, but in that moment, I wasn't proud of myself. Driving down a road full of potholes, a dusty old road, where we have warehouse after warehouse, all buying coffee. And on one big road on the outskirts of Pitalito,
We'll just get out and walk.
where the giant coffee warehouses sit all along this same dusty strip. If you are a coffee farmer and you've grown commodity coffee, this is the dusty strip you're going to be driving down to get the best deal you can for your coffee.
Whew. All right, here we are on the outskirts of Pitalito on a hot, dusty old day.
And joining me here in Pitalito is the Coffee Quest community manager, Marco Marin.
Let's go for a walk.
In fact, I see a lot of coffee farmers coming along with their sacks of coffee strapped to the back.
We're still waiting for the store to be open.
The coffee warehouses up and down this road are enormous.
Massive,
Huge. You could fit a plane in that warehouse.
definitely. A couple of planes.
Inside these warehouses, we see coffee sacks stacked so high you can only get new sacks to the top with a conveyor belt.
You want to go and talk to them?
Yeah.
I want to know how things work around here.
William, que lo acompañe.
So we went to find the person who runs the place, a guy called William.
Mucho gusto, mi nombre es William Alexander Meneses, trabajo en la empresa Sugden.
Eso es una estación de comprimiento.
Sí, aquí
So this massive warehouse is a buying station. It's where a coffee exporter or some kind of middleman, they purchase coffees from farmers who live all around and then often send these coffees elsewhere in Colombia to get processed in the dry mill. And like I mentioned, this is a commodity buying station. And even though Erick grows specialty coffee, he could still choose to sell his coffee here. But of course, he won't. Because, as we're soon going to see, this commodity buying station is going to make Erick's specialty coffees very not special. Very commoditized.
¿Cuáles tipos de cafés compras?
Aquí pues normalmente esos son puras, se puede decir que son mezclas o blends.
So to start with, William tells me they will basically buy almost any type of coffee from anybody.
Son cafés de todo tipo.
And so if Erick wanted to sell his beautiful specialty coffees here, what he would do is open his WhatsApp on a Sunday and he'd notice that this buying station had just posted new prices.
Bueno, en esta empresa normalmente los anuncios se hacen el día domingo.
If Erick likes the prices they're paying, he'd get in touch and say, hey, I'm going to bring you down some coffee.
El cliente le dice tiene tanta cantidad de café.
Erick would then bring his coffee down with a Jeep, and then the buying station would do some basic checks, like weighing it,
Se procede a pesar.
doing some physical checks of the beans,
También se le hace de análisis físico y análisis sensorial, sí señor.
and more or less, that's it. Erick Bravo's coffees would be put on one of those conveyor belts, shoved on top of one of those giant piles of coffee, and once his coffees are on that pile, they become anonymized. And eventually his coffees will be blended with all the other coffees sitting below his. And this is by design. This is how it's supposed to be. Commodity coffee is all about volume, speed, and keeping costs low.
All right, so that's how it's done. So basically, you come here, you like the price, get the contract, sell your coffee, off you go.
And off you go.
And
They buy anything.
They buy anything.
They buy anything. They just do make sure that how bad the coffee it is, and then they pay for it. But doesn't matter what you bring, they will buy it.
They'll buy it.
And I was curious to know from Erick, how would he feel if he had to sell his coffees this way? If we rewound the clock 10, 20 years, and his beautiful specialty coffees had to be bought at a commodity buying station, and it was inevitable that it get blended in with other people's coffees, how would he feel about that?
Se sentiría, digamos, que todo el proceso que uno ha llevado a cabo desde que lo siembra, digamos.
I'd feel like all the work we have done in the field, it will just disappear once they mix it with everything else.
Al hacer la mezcla. La satisfacción de uno es...
What really gives me satisfaction is seeing, for example, a roaster out there naming my coffee, like
Borbón de Chaferote, Erick Bravo, Luis Gerardo Bravo. Esa es como la satisfacción que...
that's what makes you proud as producer, seeing your coffee from your farm out there on its own in a shop. But when they mix it all together, that whole process we have carried out on the farm, it just gets broken.
Se rompe como todo el proceso que se ha llevado a cabo en las fincas.
Coming up next, we see where Erick Bravo actually sells his coffee. And what we find there is very different. So we saw how in the commodity world, coffee is bought and then almost immediately anonymized. And as we heard from Erick Bravo, he would have a problem with that because, all that effort he put in would go to waste if his coffees got immediately blended. But 20 odd years ago, that was basically the law. This is what had to happen. All coffees had to go through Colombia's nationalized buying system, run by the FNC, the National Coffee Authority. And the system was built on blending lots of coffees together. In the early 2000s, though, the laws were relaxed, and it was now possible to export coffee out of Colombia from just one specific farm. But building this new kind of supply chain, a specialty supply chain, takes time. And, even 10 years later, in the early 2010s, there were still very few exporters who specialized in buying microlots from specific farms. And that created problems for farmers who had beautiful specialty coffees and wanted more income. And it was a problem that two foreigners living in Colombia in the early 2010s also noticed. Foreigners who were living there full-time had Colombian partners like, for example, Ronald de Hommel, who was working as a photojournalist.
Doing mostly stories about underrepresented communities.
And during his reporting, he met farmers who were struggling to find buyers for their beautiful specialty coffees.
I met some coffee farmers and they told me about how difficult it is to get a decent price for the product and that they didn't know what happened to their coffee. So I decided to see if I could bring their coffee to Holland. I built a web shop so that we could sell it roasted to consumers and tell their story. And pretty quickly, I got very passionate about it and very motivated to grow it.
And funnily enough, there's a very similar story taking place at the same time with an American, Stephen Levine, who had moved to Colombia to be closer to his in-laws.
Well, my old life is in New York. I was working in finance and had enough of finance in New York. So I basically, long story short, moved to Colombia because of my wife.
And this same issue of coffee farmers struggling to get higher prices hit him in the face as well.
And then 2014, I'm at the Botanical Gardens here in Medellin, and there's a family of producers serving their own coffee. So I started talking to them, and one thing led to another, and they were like, well, do you want to help us export our coffee? December 2013, I went and visited their farm, and you've been to coffee farms, it's always a magical experience, even so your very first visit. And basically, 4 months later, I exported 7 bags of their coffee to the US.
Word spreads fast, and Ronald and Stephen get connected.
Ronald and I met, we sat in the office, and basically from that day, we started working together.
And they formed a specialty coffee exporter called the Coffee Quest. And over the years, as they grow, they set up more and more buying stations in different regions across Colombia, including one in Pitalito, the same city where there's that massive, dusty commodity buying strip that we saw earlier. And so let's go see the Coffee Quest buying station in Pitalito to discover how a specialty coffee buying station is different from that massive commodity buying station we saw earlier. We pull up outside, and the first thing I notice is that this is not an industrial road. We're in a residential area. And in fact, the Coffee Quest buying station, it's actually a 2-story house with a garage on the ground floor and 2 apartments at the top. One of those apartments is the quality control room, and the other is where somebody lives with their little yapping dog. And the Coffee Quest uses what would otherwise be a garage as the storage area for the coffees. I count literally a dozen or so coffee bags. A dozen or so. Like, compare that to those mountains of thousands of bags we saw earlier.
Mi nombre es María Erazo, soy analista de calidades acá en el punto de Pitalito.
María Erazo, a coffee quality manager with the Coffee Quest, she very kindly takes time out of her day to show me how it all works. So, on one day of the week, the Coffee Quest puts up the prices for different qualities of coffee. Erick Bravo, he likes a price, and so he sends down a sample of his coffee. His sample arrives.
Acá vamos a trabajar con una muestra de 300 gramos. Aquí pesamos 300 gramos.
Maria inspects him physically, similarly to how it's done in the commodity buying station.
En negro y guayadas tenemos 1,0.
But with some extra checks too, like checking how big the beans are, using screens with differently sized holes.
Ya ahora vamos a pasar a sacarle la humedad.
She also takes a moisture reading, the grain moisture tester, the PM450. So even though there's an extra step or two here, this is broadly similar actually to what the commodity buying stations are doing. But there is one big difference coming up.
Ya aquí ya terminaríamos el análisis físico y pasaríamos al área de tostión y catación.
Okay. Vamos. Maria actually tastes their coffee. She roasts it up and then tastes it, which is something commodity buying stations rarely ever do.
Tiene unas notas aromáticas, miel clara y naranja.
Okay, so Maria, she roasts up and then tastes Erick's coffee. She evaluates it for its flavor, quality.
Y nuestro puntaje es 85.
She then phones up Erick Bravo, offers a price. If Erick's happy, he then brings that entire lot of specialty coffees down. He would haul the coffee bags off the Jeep, and they would get tagged with his name. This is the second big difference. We know what his coffees actually taste like, and we know that they belong to him. And it is not going to get blended with anybody else's coffees. After a couple more checks, Erick's coffee is now ready to be sent to the dry mill. Along comes a truck, and Erick's coffees begin this long snaking journey through the Andes all the way north, 800 kilometers, to the small city of Rio Negro, just outside Medellin. The truck pulls into an industrial business park, the warehouse doors open, and Erick Bravo's coffees are unloaded into the Coffee Quest's dry mill.
Whoa, smells like coffee.
It's naturals.
Ooh, so funky.
So here at the dry mill, its most important job is to remove the parchment that's around the green beans. Because once you've done that, what you have left is a green bean ready to chuck into a roaster. But dry mills also do many, many other things that all come down to quality control. And the stakes are high because the coffees that are coming out of this dry mill are going to be sealed up and then shipped across the world. And the next time they're going to be opened is at the roastery. And when roasters open these bags, they're going to be inspecting thousands of dollars worth of coffee. And if it's not what they're expecting, there's going to be returns, damaged relationships, maybe lost sales. Like I said, the stakes are always high. And Stephen Levine, the Coffee Quest American co-founder we heard from earlier, feels them.
The dry mill for me is like the scariest part. Scariest part.
We're walking down now into the scary depths of the dry mill.
It's not scary for us because we have the best team ever. But now we're walking down to the scary depths.
Down on the ground floor, behind big, thick walls, are the machines of this dry mill. And you know when they're on.
The giant has been stirred from its slumber.
Erick's coffees are going to be passing through the belly of this beast. A beast which has 4 stomachs. 4 different steps. All right, let's walk into the mouth of this monster.
Oh my lord, here we go. Woo.
I am hit with dust and noise.
It is very dusty in here. My God.
Yeah, that's why all the staff that works here has to wear protective
Absolutely.
equipment.
The workers in this mill, it's like they've just stepped off the film set of a movie about some bioreactor that's gone wrong. They're dressed head to toe in protective suits, masks, and earmuffs. So like I mentioned, in this dry mill, there are 4 machines. And honestly, each machine gets more and more impressive, technologically speaking. So, machine number 1.
Spanish is called the trilladora.
Remove the parchment.
This pulls the parchment off, or the dry cherry.
Erick's coffees bounce down a shaking floor, and then teeth cut into the parchment, and the parchment, which is like this yellow casing, peels off.
So ours scrapes off the parchment, but does that in a very gentle way.
And so now Erick Bravo's coffee beans are green, naked, without their parchment. And then they make their way into the second machine.
This sorts by size.
So this is an extraordinary contraption.
So 7 big sieves, filters, with different size holes.
It's like lots of huge shaking trays all stacked on top of one another. The holes on the top table are the biggest, and then each table below has smaller and smaller holes. And they're always shaking, vibrating. And so Erick Bravo's coffee beans, they're poured into the top table, and if they're too small, they fall into the next table. And if they're too small again, they fall into the next table.
And this way it separates the beans by size.
Until eventually what you have are all these coffees separated into 7 different sizes. And this is really important for roasters, because roasters want to roast beans which are all of a similar size. Otherwise,
some might start to over-roast before others.
Segmenting Erick's coffees into different sizes helps them be roasted more evenly. Okay, and now, the third machine.
Coffee is passed to the gravity table.
This machine sorts Erick's coffees by density.
And it separates the lighter beans, which generally indicate they're either underdeveloped or they have a defect or they're too small.
And honestly, I cannot understand the physics of how this machine works. It is simple. It is genius. Okay, so this is one shaking table with tiny, tiny holes, and air is always blowing out of them upwards. And it's also on a slight angle, so it's kind of rising up from one of the corners. And for some reason, beans which are denser move in one direction, and beans that are lighter go in a different direction. And the beans that are too light are then removed and sold into like the local market. And now finally, we arrive at step 4.
So this is really cool. This is the color sorter.
The color sorter. So Erick Bravo's coffees flow down like a waterfall in front of sensors and sometimes cameras. And they very quickly decide whether each individual bean is the right or the wrong color. For example, if Erick's coffee were to have a black bean, which could be very moldy and taint his coffee's flavor, the sensor would identify it and then spit it out with a little puff of air. And this happens at an incredible speed. Coffee beans are flowing down in front of the sensors faster than my eye can track them. And the machine is going gangbusters, going poof, 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 poof. A machine gun with pinpoint accuracy, puffing out coffee beans which have the wrong color. And all these rejected beans, again, they get sold into the local market. And now, finally, I can get the hell out of this dry mill.
Oh my lord. Oh, whew. That place is intense. Jesus Christ.
I'm covered in dust. And so is my microphone. Erick Bravo's coffees are now very consistent in size, density. They're stilled up and now wait for the journey down to the port. So we've seen the care and attention that goes on in a specialty-focused mill. But what would happen if Erick Bravo's coffees instead went into a commodity-focused dry mill? You know, if his coffees were in that commodity supply chain that began when his coffees could have been sold in that giant aircraft hangar warehouse back in Pitalito. Coming up next, we see the big end of town.
Trilladora, La Boyana, Café Sempiterno.
So back in Pitalito, I'm with Marco Marin of the Coffee Quest, and he's been pulling out all the stops to help me speak to a commodity dry mill. And we managed to visit one on the outskirts of Pitalito.
Just walking along the dirt road, horse in a little field, behind a barbed wire fence, mountains in the distance, a church spire, crucifix on top.
We roll open a heavy metal door, and I meet the owner of this commodity dry mill.
Mi nombre es Carlos Enrique Bautista. Yo soy el comercial de Café SAS.
And Carlos is very kind of his time, showing me his dry mill that's owned and run by his family.
La rentan mi esposa y mis 2 hijos.
Okay, so now let's imagine that a truck full of Erick Bravo's award-winning specialty coffees were brought to a commodity-focused dry mill. From the outset, what happens at this commodity dry mill looks more or less the same as we just saw with the Coffee Quest. Except there are 2 big differences. The first is that this commodity dry mill is significantly bigger. Like the color sorter.
And here comes the color sorter.
Va para máquinas electrónicas.
I've never seen a color sorter so big in my life. So much bigger than the Coffee Quest.
In comparison to ours.
Yours is like a quarter of that.
It's only a quarter of that.
Yeah. This is 4 times as large.
This commodity-focused dry mill has an enormous capacity.
Esta planta tiene una capacidad de 700 toneladas al mes.
700 tons of coffee per month. What the Coffee Quest can mill in an entire year, they can mill in a month.
Pero esta no es pequeña, tampoco es grande. Es una planta.
And what's really funny is that Carlos, the owner, he was like, yeah, but we're not really that big. There are dry mills much bigger than us.
Hay plantas que hacen 100, 200 contenedores mes.
Those really giant dry mills could process in a month what it would take the Coffee Quest to do in 6 years. So how does a commodity mill's focus on scale affect what would happen to Erick Bravo's delicious specialty coffees? Well, for one, it would be hard to process his coffees in the first place because his lot sizes are just too small. 5, 10 bags? Now, the ways these small lots are organized at the Coffee Quest, each lot, no matter how small, has their own bin with their own tracking number.
So we'll send them the codes and they know where the code is all around the warehouse, which cage it's in.
But in a commodity dry mill like this, the quantities are so large, hundreds of bags. You don't need to be so fastidious in your organization because they
just have a big pile of bags up. Yeah. And they have a paper in between. And you're like, well, where's my lot? Oh, below this paper is one lot and above that paper is the other lot. Just the paper stuffed in.
And that's exactly what I saw here at Huila Café, this commodity-focused dry mill. There is a good chance 5 or 10 bags of Erick's beautiful coffees would get mixed together by accident. Another issue with just this massive scale is that they use machines that mill faster, but that has downsides. For example, that first machine that takes off the parchment, in a commodity mill, it's a friction-based machine.
Le quita esto con su fricción y todo eso, y nos lo pone así.
And that introduces a lot of heat to the beans.
When you're in a commercial mill and you just feel the beans, they're really warm, 40, 50, 60 degrees.
Wow. Okay. You don't want to have your green beans getting this hot because it might affect the flavors of the coffee or for how long those flavors stay fresh. At the Coffee Quest mill, they use a much gentler machine.
And this way, there's no pressure on the beans themselves, so they don't get heated up.
Right. So, overall, that's the first big difference. Scale. Okay, and now, the second big difference is the number of defects. And defects are called defects for a reason, because some of them can massively impact the flavor of coffee.
Your expression, you've got to the pasilla and your expression has changed.
For example, when I was at the Coffee Quest in the dry mill, we did a cupping of defects that had been taken out during the dry milling process. Get a load of these flavors.
Smell is harsh and dry and vegetal.
When we buy Erick's coffee, we definitely don't want harsh, dry, or vegetal notes. Okay, now in Colombia, this was news to me. When it comes to exporting coffee, there are actually laws prescribing how many defects different coffees can have, right? So, for example, commodity coffee, you can't have more than 12 defects that affect the whole bean and 60 that affect parts of the bean. But for specialty exports, the government also prescribes that, and it's much more strict. And they say maximum 5 that affect the whole bean and maximum 25 that affect parts of the bean. But at the Coffee Quest specialty dry mill, they're even more strict.
Yeah, so we want to export all our specialty coffees with 0 defects in the first group and maximum 20 partials.
And so, at the Coffee Quest specialty dry mill, they put a lot of attention at each of those 4 steps in the dry mill to remove defects. I mean, it gets to the point where they're creating bottlenecks for themselves. Like, for example, the third machine in the dry mill, the density sorter.
Now, you could just open up, we'll call it the mouth, like this.
Stephen Levine spoke to me in detail about how they calibrate the machine carefully.
Good coffee we would lose as well.
That's about 6 inches.
Compared to 1, basically.
Compared to 1 inch.
And they will pass the same coffee over and over and over again through this machine so they can very slowly remove only the defects and not the good coffee.
So the key is they need to be watching and checking here. So what they'll do is they'll take a sample outside and say, okay.
Their fastidiousness at just this one point here, it's creating such a bottleneck. They actually planned the dry mill to fit 2 of these machines.
It's planned out so that if we came to that, we could get a second density. That's interesting.
But a commodity dry mill is all about speed, volume, keeping costs low, and so they permit many more defects. And this is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that, where this coffee is going to go, defects just don't matter that much. Because it's going to be drank by someone like my mum. When she drinks her lavazza, she doesn't care about the defects in the green because it's roasted dark and she's going to be adding milk and sugar. Nevertheless, I asked Erick Bravo, how would you feel if your beautiful specialty coffees went through a commodity dry mill? And so, your beans got really, really hot and the flavors of your coffees were maybe compromised with defects.
Al ustedes poner el café, digamos, a esas temperaturas
when you expose it to those temperatures or all those little errors that happen during the hulling, my specialty coffee, it will not really be a specialty anymore. That whole process gets ruined when the coffee goes through those machines that don't just meet the standards to produce a good cup.
Como con los requisitos para sacar un buen café.
Okay, so what we've seen so far is that coffee that goes through a specialty supply chain, it's treated with a lot more care and attention, many fewer defects, traceability. But this is what I found really surprising. The costs. Okay, so the cost of exporting coffee from the buying station through to the port in a commodity supply chain, that adds 26 cents to the cost of a coffee, 26 cents per pound of green coffee. But if you do it in a specialty supply chain, the cost is 50% more expensive. And initially I thought that was because of, this very careful milling that we saw that creates bottlenecks. But actually, no. That's not the reason. Coming up next, the real reason why getting specialty coffee from farm down to port costs so much more money. All right, so getting coffee from the buying station down to the port costs 50% more if you do it in a specialty way, like the Coffee Quest does. And although the coffee, it's milled much more carefully, many fewer defects, that's actually not the reason it's more expensive. The real reason has to do with tasting coffees, quality control on coffee's flavor. And when I first ran the calculations, I was like, no, really? Is that the reason? How expensive can it be to taste coffee? Well, let's find out. Let's look now at the amount of work it takes to evaluate the flavors of Erick's coffee as it moves from the Coffee Quest buying station to their mill. Let's press pause on this episode and rewind. Right back to the moment that Erick Bravo first gives a sample of his coffee to the Coffee Quest buying station in that 2-story house with the garage and the yapping dog. So, Erick comes in with a small sample of one of the lots he wants to sell to the Coffee Quest.
First cupping, farmer brings down a sample instead of just bringing down the whole lot.
So what I'm going to show you first is what it takes just to cup this one sample of coffee. Maria, the quality manager we met earlier, what she does is she takes a sample of coffee, which is in parchment. She grinds off the parchment that's around the green beans. Takes about a minute. Does the physical checks, which we mentioned earlier, and now she can do the tasting.
Pasaríamos al área de tostión y catación.
Okay. Vamos. All right, now we're going upstairs. She now roasts the coffee. That's 10 minutes of her time. She's just there, tracking the coffee, seeing how dark it's getting, trying to get it to the right color. Then she weighs out Erick's roasted coffee into 5 cups. Grinds them up. One at a time. This could be 5, 10 minutes. She boils up liters of water, adds it to the coffee. She waits for the coffees to brew and to cool down a bit. And now finally she can actually taste the coffees to evaluate what does Erick's coffee taste like? How good is this sample of coffee? And she doesn't just taste them once. She tastes the coffees over and over again as they cool to different temperatures. This tasting process alone takes 30 to 40 minutes. And then she has to wash up all the cups. So that is all the work it takes to taste one sample of coffee once. But the Coffee Quest is going to be tasting this lot of Erick's coffee a lot more than just once. Because let's say they like the coffee, they want to buy it, they agree a price with Erick, he brings down the entire lot of coffee, and then they repeat that whole process again.
To make sure that the actual coffee, the lot of the coffee, is the same as the sample.
That's a minute removing the parchment. That's 10 minutes roasting the coffee. That's another 10 minutes just weighing and grinding the coffees. And then 40 minutes tasting the coffees. And 5 minutes washing up. And we're not done yet.
And they take out another sample and they send it to us here in this lab. That's the third cupping.
So the dry mill also wants to cup this coffee for quality assurance to make sure that, this buying station in Pitalito got it right. and also so they can start telling their roaster customers about the sorts of coffees that are coming. And so here we go again. A minute taking off the parchment to Erick's coffee, 10 minutes roasting it, 10 minutes weighing it up and grinding it, 40 minutes cupping it, 5 minutes cleaning up. But we're still not done, because there is often a fourth cupping as well. And again, this fourth cupping is just quality assurance, making sure the mill is well calibrated. Or maybe the buyer, the roaster, when they got their sample and they tasted it themselves.
The buyer had an 86, but we have an 85. Like, what's going on here?
All right, let's just taste it one more time, just to be sure. That's a minute taking off the parchment. That's 10 minutes roasting it. That's 10 minutes preparing the coffee into glasses and grinding them. That's 40 minutes cupping it and 5 minutes cleaning up. And all of this work is just for one lot of Erick Bravo's coffee. But Erick Bravo has lots of different lots of coffee. And they all need to be cupped as well, over and over and over again, 4 times each. That's cupping after 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 cupping. But of course, Erick Bravo's not alone. There are many farmers who work with the Coffee Quest across Colombia, and they all sell many, many, many distinct lots of coffee. That's cupping after 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 cupping.
So how many coffees do you taste on an annual basis?
I mean, there's 5,000 different lots, 15, 20,000. It's a zillion cuppings a year. Like, it's a number so big you can't even count that high.
This is why buying and milling specialty coffee costs 50% more than commodity coffee. All these cuppings. Okay, but now, Erick Bravo's coffee's journey still has one final stage left. There is one more step in Colombia that could actually ruin Erick's coffee even before they leave the country. Coming up next, Erick Bravo's coffee heads to the Caribbean port of Cartagena, a port that at the time I visited was about to get bashed.
Category 5 hurricane approaching.
Okay, so now we're back following the journey of Erick Bravo's coffee. We've seen it already go from the buying station all the way to the Coffee Quest dry mill near Medellin, and then along comes a truck, picks up his coffee, and then drives it for another couple of days over 700 kilometers north to the sea, the Caribbean city of Cartagena.
Here we are in the streets of Cartagena, near the port, hailing down a taxi.
And that's where I joined Coffee Quest co-founder Ronald Hummel on a wet, windy day. And Ronald has really worked his network to get us access to the port of Cartagena. Now, this is a port, understandably security, super tight. So tight, in fact, I almost didn't even get in because there was some paperwork issue with my travel insurance.
What you sent for your insurance was not enough.
But anyway, after negotiating and waiting around for 30 minutes, we walk through the metal detectors and we're in.
It's just a very long line of containers.
We walk in between these towering stacks of containers that gives me the same claustrophobic feeling I got back when I was in New York walking amongst the tall skyscrapers of Lower Manhattan.
So I see a lot of coffee sacks.
And after a couple of minutes walking, we arrive at the coffee export warehouse.
Look at this, look at this. There's like 20 coffee sacks stacked up high.
So these are gigantic pallets.
Huge pallets. And you can smell the green.
Yeah.
So strong.
So this warehouse for coffee exports, it covers both commodity and specialty coffees. And the first truck we see carrying coffees to this warehouse is carrying commodity coffees. So let's see what would happen to Erick Bravo's coffee if, for whatever reason, his coffees were actually in a commodity supply chain and had arrived here in the port.
The truck is completely stacked full to the top.
The truck filled to the brim.
The truck sags under the weight of hundreds of sacks of commodity coffee. And now look, this unloading process ain't pretty. Workers like bees in a hive swarm around it. Some workers have harnesses and they clip into ropes and then clamber onto the top of the truck. And then they dig these metal hooks with sharp pointy ends into the bags and rip them down into the floor. It is fast. It is violent. Heaps of coffee bags just lie on the floor. But it's not a good day for these bags to be lying on this particular floor because today there is a hurricane warning in Cartagena.
A lot of dark clouds in the sky.
Buckets of rain have been coming down all day. And although the unloading bay is covered,
Like this leak in the roof that's right in front of us, dripping on coffee bags.
this leaky roof is a problem because these commodity coffees, they're just stored in jute sacks, this extremely porous fabric. So as they're thrown on the ground, water could soak up into the jute sacks and go directly into the coffee beans, possibly turning them moldy. And another big issue are the bloody forklifts driving around like crazy.
Tienen que cuidarse.
That was a bit...
You have to be aware here.
My God.
They drive here just as on the roads.
They're like mosquitoes, these things.
The forklift trucks, they're buzzing around so aggressively.
I gotta say, it's a very dangerous work environment.
I honestly fear for my life. I put my back up against the wall of the warehouse, hoping to God I don't get punctured by one of its forks.
The potential for accidents here, especially with these forklifts running around, it's such a fast operation here.
And then one of the forklift drivers, he's driving so aggressively that at one point a sack of coffee just flies off and green beans splatter across the loading bay.
So some coffee bags just fell off one of the forklifts. Now there's a big fat pile and green beans have been spilled everywhere.
Some workers eventually come and sweep it up, get rid of it. But yeah, that coffee, it's gone. It's lost. Crushed under the wheels of these maniacal forklifts. And when I was on the phone with Erick Bravo, I asked him, how would you feel if at the very last moment, just before your coffees got put onto a ship, your coffees fell onto a wet floor, soaked up this rainwater, and then maybe also got crushed under the wheels of a forklift?
Yo pienso que si la empresa donde yo entrego no tiene una buena logística para...
I think if the company I deliver to doesn't have good logistics in place to take care of our coffees, then yeah, I think there are the losses, both for me and for them. Because if the company isn't handling the coffee properly during transport, I imagine they could lose a roaster too, for not taking good care of the coffee.
Por no darle un buen manejo a los cafés en transporte.
But fortunately, when it comes to specialty coffees, it's a very different story.
Oh, there's your truck.
Soon, a truck carrying specialty coffees from their Coffee Quest rolls into the loading bay.
Esta es nuestra carga.
The back of the truck is covered in this fabric, so workers clamber to the top of it.
So this guy is strapped to a hook on his back and he's climbing up the back of the truck, undoing all the buckles.
They hook ropes into the side loops of the fabric and then pull it back to reveal the specialty coffees inside. And what I see is a truck that's basically half empty.
And your truck is nowhere near as full as the other one.
No.
And what coffee there is neatly stacked in little boxes on pallets. And along comes the forklift that very cleanly picks up the pallet and puts it down on the floor.
Okay, here comes the first pallet from the Coffee Quest truck.
But it's definitely not a perfect operation.
Let's say those boxes, they get thrashed around a bit.
A couple of boxes fall onto the floor, get scuffed.
They're not looking pristine anymore.
But if those boxes that fell off were the ones that contained Erick Bravo's coffees inside, he wouldn't need to worry. Because inside those boxes, his coffee is stored in GrainPro bags, which is this special plastic liner that's specifically made to stop odors, moisture, mold, you name it, from penetrating into the beans. Anyway, eventually all the boxes are neatly stacked. There are a whole bunch of other tests and regulations they have to pass that I'm not going to bore you with. And then they wait to be put in a container and then shipped far away to a port near you. And this could be the coffee that you drink tomorrow morning. And this, for me, is one of those crazy things about specialty coffee. About this hyper-globalized, interconnected world we're in. Like, when you decide what beans you want to buy, if you're a roaster or consumer, you go on a website, you click around, you buy this, you buy that, and coffees just appear on your doorstep one day. Then eventually you taste the coffees and they're gorgeous. They have the wonderful flavors of whatever you bought, right? In Erick Bravo's case, guava, pineapple, brown sugar. But when we buy coffees, what we don't see is the tremendously long voyage they've been on, and all the things that were done to protect this coffee as they made their way from the sides of a mountain slope all the way down to a Caribbean port about to get hit by a Category 5 hurricane. You know, for me, I still fall into the trap of sometimes treating specialty coffee just like any other commodity. You know, something you just buy off the internet, you drink it, you enjoy it, you move on. But after seeing this whole long journey in Colombia, I now sometimes just take a pause before I sip my morning cup of coffee. I think back to the farmer and the journey these coffee beans have been on, the care and attention that's gone into keeping this specialty coffee as good as it can be for me. And yeah, I'm just that little bit more grateful. And my coffee tastes even more special. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. I got to say, I really busted myself trying to learn those Latino piano rhythms on the piano. Really, really tricky. But I'm on the journey now, and you'll probably hear more of that in the future. If you want to see with your own eyes this whole journey for yourself, come to my Instagram, where I've got lots of photos and videos, @Filter Stories Podcast, link in the show notes. Now, coming up next, I help you get great water for coffee. We know this, right? Water, super important for coffee flavors, but it's so confusing and it's hard to remember. And so what I did in collaboration with BWT, I made some episodes that'll help you get good water for coffee in your cafe, roastery, or at home. And I help you remember it all, because it's so easy to forget, by telling a really, really big story. The story of Earth. After that, the final episodes in this series, we go on a deep dive into a philosophical question. What do we even stand for anymore in specialty coffee? What unifies us? And if you haven't heard it yet, this is what you're missing out in the beginning of this series. Using Toddy's cold brew kit, I help you make amazing cold brew by speaking to the world's leading coffee scientists on coffee extraction. After that, we go on a deep dive into roasting. And one particular highlight is going to Probat, the manufacturers of roasting machines, to show you some of the biggest roasters I have ever seen in my life. Then we're in Brazil looking at how coffee producers, who are a bit larger, find buyers for their flavors, one of whom is the direct trade platform Al Grano. Filter Stories and the Science of Coffee was made by me, James Harper. I also write and play the piano music. Thanks again for listening, and I'll speak to you next time.